everybody, welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Bernsanti. That was Mike asking a question of who was going to go first in this episode, and we didn't decide that, but I'll just pick. So this is the first in another round of the matriarchy episodes that we did last year in May, where I invited folks to come on and talk about women who have influenced them in their work. In one way or another. And this is a special episode of the Matriarchy series. It's the first time we've invited dudes on to the series. So Mike Huber is here and Richard Cohen is here. And then
Oh,
Stacy Benge is here.
Hi.
She's not a dude, but she just got and I thought, I did wonder about having men on a show talking about the matriarchy. But I think it's really important that we have guys talking about women who have influenced their work and women that they look up to. So I'm glad you both said yes and are here. So actually you may be able to tell that I'm getting over a cold. So I'm going to try and do very little talking in this episode other than facilitating. And I'm going to make Mike go first since he
oh
didn't
man.
since he forgot to make me uh decide who was going first before I hit record.
Oh, I
That's all
see.
your fault. So,
Okay.
Mike, I'm gonna let you go first. And the way we do these episodes is we just take turns talking about our chosen matriarch and discuss it amongst ourselves, and then move on to the next person. So, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and I'm excited because this person really influenced me and I know nothing about her at all. Um, so the person is Eve Trook, and she wrote something, I think it's 1983 is the year given, but Understanding Teachers' Use of Power, a role-playing activity. And um, Betty Jones or Elizabeth Jones quotes her in The Play is the Thing, and I don't know what other book, but twice quotes her. And then I've seen other people requote it. And it used to be that that's all you could find, but now the Betty Jones archives exist online. So you can find the actual article she wrote, Eve Trook wrote. It's typewritten. She hand corrected the typos and everything. It's really cool. But because for a while there was that awkward, you could only quote a book that quoted her because it wasn't officially published. Um, but then I found out this time writing my new book that it is in fact there. And so she writes about power. And specifically, she was writing, it was a role play activity for teachers to explore different ways of the power dynamics between a teacher and the children. And so she refers to it as you can have power on a child, power for a child, or power with a child. And I guess I'll just use her actual quote. That power on a child means the child has no real choice. The child is oppressed. Power exercised for a child means the child is provided experiences that contribute to the development of self-esteem and confidence that lead to power for the child. The child is facilitated. And power exercised with a child means that teacher and child are equals learning together, and the child acquires new power. The child and the teacher are liberated. And so that reading that originally in Place the Thing, and honestly, I just attributed it to Betty
Mm.
Jones myself. Like I always, oh yeah, I got this from, Play is the Thing. And then when I was working on my new book, which is about the way kids pretend and take on roles of power, I went back to the actual quote and it's like, oh wait, this is actually somebody else. So I know nothing about Eve as a person,
Hmm.
and yet I can say that she really influenced how I have interacted with children for whenever the Play is the Thing came out, for decades.
Hmm.
And when I was writing this book, I think that frame about power is so important that what I did with it is just when children are playing, so if they're playing good guy, bad guy, some sort of battle, whatever, Transformer and Decepticon or whatever, they are pretending in the role, they are acting out power over or power on the other. But the collaborative nature of the play, the real life situation, they're sharing power with each other. And so I thought is a really good way for when teachers or educators have that inclination to tell children to stop pretending to shoot each other, that to pause and think about what is the actual power dynamic here. Are they playing with each other? Are they trying to force the other child to do something they don't want to do? Because if the other child doesn't want to play that way, that the problem is they are exerting power over the other child. But if it's just the pretend play is that showing that power role, then as long as the real life dynamic is power with, then it can be okay. So I found this like I went back to this same thing that influenced me, 20 years ago, and it's given me a new way to talk about things. And then in discussion with Kisa March, she started quoting this, and that's when I realized I have to make sure that I'm letting people, reminding people this is Eve Trook, this isn't
Uh-huh.
Mike, So yeah, with that, I have to say, it sounds like Richard, you know a little bit more about this role playing thing, and maybe even about Eve Trook. Um,
Not so much about Eve Trook, other
okay,
than she was a name on a piece of paper that I got 31 years ago, when I was at Pacific Oaks College. And it came to me in Louise Derman Sparks' anti-bias curriculum class, which is now called anti-bias education for everybody. And it was really about, so it was about the adult's role of power and the child's role of power, and how to when it's most appropriate for the adult to control the power, to have power on a child, when she should be a facilitator and have power with power for, use her power on behalf of or for the child, and when she is freed up and liberated by discovering a worm together with the child, and both noticing for the first time that they have stripes on their tummies. I've done this role. We did the role play in class, and it just blew me away. And I've done it ever since, hundreds, if not thousands of times all around the world. And I always credit Eve Trook for it, though I've never met the woman. I don't know anything about her. But for those who don't know the role play, look it up. It's really simple and user friendly to do. You have a discussion about those three types of power, and you try to come up with practical examples. And then you pair up, or even I do them in groups of five, so that at any given time there's someone pretending to be the adult, someone pretending to be the child, and three people being observers. And each group gets manipulative, is what I'll give out. And they do a role play. And then the three observers watch for instances of power on, for, and with in the interaction. And then they talk about it. And then we come back to the large group and we all talk about what they learned. And it's been a transformative role play exercise for so many people who have just been blown away like I was that first time. And I always have Eve Trook to thank for that. Really transformed my life. A woman, I'll never know who she is. And she really transformed my career.
I just tried to Google her, and there's
yeah, there's
nothing
Really?
nothing.
other than
I've
her
I've
paper.
asked
Yeah.
people on the West Coast, tell me more about her,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
I think the people who actually knew her are mostly no longer at
Yeah,
Pacific
sure.
Oaks or no longer with us, and there's probably someone obviously, but
Yeah.
most people, it's like they've only had what Richard had, and they had the piece of paper handed to them.
Yeah.
And in
Although,
looking
Wow.
back at it, it's really cool the way she talks about why she does role playing, because she doesn't want to, even like video would be like you'd be videoing someone, a teacher doing something like oppressing a child essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's like, role play is not a replacement for real life experience,
sure.
but in this case, role playing is the ethical way to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It's also in Betty's or Elizabeth Jones' book, Teaching Adults. The whole role play is in there with instructions.
This is so wild because I've read Playing to Get Smart and I've read Teaching Adults more than once, and this I don't remember it. Like I'm so glad that it's come back up, and I'm gonna have to go back and look at both of those books again now.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I remember Mike when we were recording something we were recording, and you first this is me not talking very much. You first started talking about power on, power for, and power with. And I was like, oh my God, Mike, you're so smart. And you were like, oh, no, 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 no. I mean, you are smart, but in this case,
I'm smart enough to know who to quote.
to find the smart people. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it is the thing, I think it is going to really strike people because my last book, The Inclusion Includes Us, I quoted Tom Shakespeare,
Hmm.
and I did add a little bit to what I thought, and he talks about the types of barriers
Hmm.
that disabled people find, right? And he started talking about this in the mid 70s. I simply applied it to early childhood settings.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's all I did. And yet, that's the thing that people keep asking me about, and what I present on the most about the book. And so it's really interesting to me how at first it was uncomfortable, but then it's like, well, no, these ideas are really important. And like Richard said, like none of us here know Eve as a person and know
Hmm.
anything about her. And yet her ideas, Richard is saying what, maybe
Yeah.
thousands of people just through him have experienced her ideas. I think everyone I talk to about these, like, is like, oh, that,
Uh-huh.
makes something. I especially think Kisa Mark's next book, on liberated learning, also will have the influence. I don't know that she quotes her. I'm trying to remember because I read the draft, but still, it's like clearly an influence. Most of the book is already written before she read mine and got introduced to Eve,
Mhm.
and yet it's like, oh, this is a way of explaining it. In my book, I did say power over rather than power on. Just it when I was talking about the child's play, I don't know, it just kind of flowed better. Um, when I quote her, I should still say power on,
Mm.
um, but I do think there's something that, and I want to talk about the power four too, because even with young children, I use the example of when people are playing family, and usually the person playing mom is the one who kind of assigns the other roles, but that's power four because it's that child usually is taking, I think of that child as being the master player, to
Mhm.
use Betty Jones's term, of like, oh, you be this, and that child's choosing the role that they know the other child wants,
Mhm.
and is capable of. So there's always the kid who's the cat or the baby, because all you have to do is, follow along or just meow or just, cry once in a while and then just follow what other people are doing. That's like that power four, because that child is demonstrating that same thing in the way a teacher would also. And so
Mhm.
I think that's an important, too often I know I would go to the realm of it's either power over or power with a person, right? You're either telling them what to do or you're letting them decide. And yet there's this middle thing that's really most of what we teach. I think sometimes when people hear play-based learning, they think, oh, you just let the kids do whatever they want. And power four is a great way to explain it. No, like if I know this is, they're being unintentionally cruel to another child, I'm going to assert my power to
Mhm.
help them understand the power they're asserting. And for the child who's, you know, being whatever, hurt or whatever.
Mhm.
And so I feel like that it's like a missing piece in a lot of the ways I talk to people, and at my best, we'll talk about that piece, but power four is just this two-word way to say it.
Mhm.
It's like, no, there are times, in fact, a lot of the times, a teacher has to exert power for children. But the question is, are you exerting your power because you are helping that child gain power, or are you
Mhm.
exerting it because you want them to comply? And
Exactly.
it's such a simple way of saying it. And there's a
Yeah.
reason why those of us who know her work keep quoting her work. It's still this one piece of paper.
Yeah,
But it's
What a
amazing.
powerful piece
Powerful.
of
It
paper,
is
though.
power.
I mean,
Yeah.
man.
true.
Power for all of us.
And the difference between power, when you really start to watch over and over, in my instance, adults and children interacting, the difference between power for and power on is very subtle and can be very individualized. So, to take your example, Mike, the little girl who says, I'm the mommy, you're the daddy, or it could be a little boy, the little child who says, I'm the mommy, you're the daddy, and you're the baby. They could be using power four, and because, as you said, they know the other children and they know the roles they want to play. Or they could be kind of in a controlling mode and saying, I'm the mommy, you're the daddy, you're the baby, go. and that's power on. And so it's
Right.
all about the intentionality of of one of the people.
Yeah. And I wanted to, this is great because I want to make sure I quoted the end of her role playing thing. She says exactly that. So she knew this from the beginning, back in whatever, 1983 or whatever. She says, it will rapidly become clear how important language, both content and inflection, become in judging the way in which power is used. For example, it will rapidly become clear how important language. Oh, wait, that's a
Yeah, you're circling.
typo. Oh my God. The most effective liberator teachers tend to extend child speech and reflect child action in detail. They tend also to speak concisely, not too often, and in a matter-of-fact tone of voice.
I like that.
So it's just amazing that she had it then, and yeah, and I do enjoy that it's typos included.
Mhm.
So it's easy
Well,
to.
I'm
Oh wait,
wondering,
I
There's
crossed
some
out.
Lillian Katz work out there that does the same thing, still on the
Yeah,
old typewriter with some
yeah.
handwritten
do you have it in
corrections.
front of you there, Mike? The originally written one? Because here,
I have
Can you
I
prove what you're
have
saying,
my
Mike?
typewritten for it, but I can quickly. I had it up
well,
before.
I'll tell you, here's what I'm curious about. Well,
Yeah,
let me start by saying one of the reasons why it's been so important to me all my career, and one of the reasons why it came to me in the anti-bias curriculum class, is because Eve Trook very intent to what was told to me. Eve Trook very intentionally used the words oppression and liberation,
yeah,
which you don't ever hear applied to adults and children. You hear
Mhm.
applied to sociocultural and socioeconomic groups in the
Right.
adult world. And so when I saw this, the words oppression and liberation were italicized to really cause you to have extra conversation about why might the author have done that. And that's a really interesting conversation to have around anti-bias education.
yep, yeah. And the original, because it's funny, because I was actually just talking to my child about this, that there's no italics in it.
Oh, there aren't.
Instead, it's underlined or capitalized,
Oh,
which
okay.
makes it
Because of the
hard for the
typewriter.
editor to decide how should we quote this, because
Mhm.
Okay.
it was simply because had she been using, a computer, if it had been done 10 years later, she
Right.
would have used italics. But
Right.
instead, it's underlined. Power on a child means oppressed, and both are underlined.
Mm.
Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, you saw me do the underline. And also on, for, and with are capitalized and underlined. And then the oppressed, facilitated, liberated are underlined. But yeah, but that's definitely a really big part of it. And she does kind of in the intro real quickly say, and there's something she hand wrote and is either erased or lost to the scan. It was maybe written in a different color pen. So I don't know what she said exactly, but it's something around the teachers experience liberating power intuitively as well as explicitly, learning that only the process, not the content of the liberating behavior, is
Yes.
possible to predict and prepare for. Like just yeah, the fact that it's just these like few paragraphs, because most of it is just the role playing scenarios,
Yes.
blows me away how succinctly she says this.
Yes.
But yeah,
It's also a wonderful way to teach newbies the concept of facilitation.
Mm,
As a lot of Heather people in our classes, they either think power on or power with. They either think I'm in control or I'm their friend. And
mhm,
to try to help them understand what is facilitation, this role play really illuminates it.
mhm. Yeah. Um,
God bless you, Eve Trook. We love you.
yeah.
I know.
But we
I know.
really don't know anything like where she like
No,
it's I feel like we're like dissecting like a historical document that we just,
right?
we have
Right,
things we
I
don't
know.
know and
I
She
always
says she
assumed
works
she
at a
was a
lab
Pacific Oaks
school.
person. Oh, maybe she was at the children's school at Pacific
She
Oaks.
was a Pacific Oaks person. I did see that much. She does have a Facebook page
Oh, really?
that says Pacific Oaks College, but
Oh,
I didn't find any. And there's no Wikipedia page. There's no about
Yeah,
Eve Trook pages that I found, other than like her work, like the
oh,
paper.
yeah.
oh.
Um,
And then
just
different ways,
just in
because
this
it came
really
up in a
quick Google search
conversation
that
in
I
an
did while you
exchange
guys were
article.
talking. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think Margie Carter in like that column she does one time
Of
mentioned it or
course,
something.
yeah,
Mhm.
of course.
But again, same thing where there's nothing else about Eve herself
Yeah.
except the work, which you know,
But I mean, in some ways
ideas.
that I think, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, of course, we're curious about her and I want to know about her life now, but I'd rather read her work than someone else's
Oh, for sure.
work about her, or when
Yeah.
I'm reading someone else's work about her, I'm going to want to go read her work too.
Yeah. I
So,
think the one thing for me that if she is still alive, I would want her to know how important she has been
yeah,
to
for
so many of
sure.
us.
Yes.
And if she's not alive, that her
Mhm.
children hear how important her work
Yeah.
was to us. That's the part that I wish I knew just a little more,
Yeah.
because I do often message authors
Yeah.
that influence me.
Yeah.
You started a podcast to do the same.
To trick them into
But
coming on the show, really.
but
Mike, if you find out how to reach Eve Trook or her family, if you would please let me know,
Yeah.
I'd love to send them a message as well.
Miriam
yeah,
Belogorski probably knows.
Oh, yeah.
I think I've asked her though. That's the funny
Oh,
thing.
okay. All right.
Maybe I
Well,
haven't though. I have asked some other people on the West Coast, but I
yeah,
might
we'll
have.
find out.
Maybe I didn't ask Miriam yet, but
Yeah.
because I have been just like kind of obsessed with like how much
Yeah.
like I didn't realize that her work would end up throughout my book.
Yeah.
You know, I quote
Someone
her
someone will
like
know
twice,
and get in
probably maybe
touch.
three. Yeah, but
Yeah.
still,
Yeah.
it yeah, that's the part that feels weird.
Yeah. Well,
That's all.
thank you,
And
Eve
it's not
Trook.
even a thing you can buy. Like it's not like she's like her book is still in print because it's not a
Yeah.
book. It's,
Yeah.
Well, it's so fascinating to see the way power shows up in incredibly subtle ways. And so we notice in the role plays, when the person playing the role of teacher brings the toy to the role play, do they hold on to the toy? Do they set
mm,
it down in front of the child and let see what happens? Which kind of power is that? When
Hmm.
the child
right.
is playing with the toy, do they say, "What color is that block? What kind of power is that?"
Hmm.
Or do they let the child play with the blocks in the way they want to play with them? What kind of power is that? And it shows up in such power, which is so important in early childhood and in the early childhood years of our lives. Autonomy and power
Hmm. Hmm.
shows up in so many subtle ways that if you try to add up your use as the adult of power over the course of a day, you have to add in all the little tiny ways you're exerting power that you may not even realize.
Hmm.
It's really, really interesting.
Hmm.
All
If
right.
nothing else,
Well,
I think it gives teachers another thing to wonder about, right? Like another way to be curious about what's really happening with children
Another
and
way
with
to
us and
access.
children. Yeah.
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I want to keep going though because we've
Yeah.
got a couple more to get
No,
through.
I thought
Stacy,
that's a good way to wrap up.
can I ask you to go
Yes.
next, Stacy?
Ask the chick.
Okay, so my person is Dr. Marianne Gibbs, and she is still presenting and speaking in the early childhood world, but she's an occupational therapist. And I heard her speak for the first time in fall of 2004. It was very, very impactful to me. But she was speaking at the Texas AEYC conference, and her program's called Right Out of the Box. But I was still in the classroom and was just curious about physical development. And I will say, of everybody I've heard present in every session I've sat through, that was the one that impacted me more than any other. And so that is really where I've started kind of learning about physical development in the body. It's like I had like a little bit of knowledge like from school and but like that's the first time I heard somebody really just break the body down and the whole, mobility on stability. And every movement we have with a smaller muscle hinges on, which I say this all the time, depends on a bigger muscle or a bigger part of our body being developed and stabilized. And but she's the one who really kind of opened my eyes to this whole concept and really saying before children write, their bodies need to be fully developed. And I just recently threw away my handout I had from that session because she has a book. She is that you can go to her website and get, and I quote her uh, quite a bit through my chapter 5 in my book. But what I love about her, well, and let me back up. That's why I got rid of that handout, because I'm like, well, I have this here, but the notes that I took on the handout, and then just again, the developing the torso and things we can do in the classroom to develop the shoulder stability, elbow all the way down to the hands. Um, but I went back to my classroom and like changed things up, and it started changing how I was having conversations, with parents. I, was not doing worksheets and all that already, but she kind of gave me that substance behind to be able to say, this is why I'm not doing it. And I remember her saying how she started speaking was, she was an OT, I think it was in Houston ISD at the time. And she said all these elementary teachers were coming to her saying, children can't hold pencils correctly. They're doing odd things with their body. And she's like, pretty much, I don't want to say that she said those kids are a lost cause, but it kind of was like it, and their brains and their bodies have kind of solidified this is now how they're functioning. And she's like, it's the preschool teachers who hold the key to this. And she's like, it's that development first. And so that I just remember that just blowing my mind, and me being able to have those conversations, with parents. One of the things, I talk a lot about like separation of hand, and she says like, that the two, your people on YouTube can see me doing this, but your ring finger and your pinky finger are your sleepy fingers, and your thumb, index, and middle finger are your busy fingers. And so I always, with the children in my classroom, we would talk about using our busy fingers, and I'd had cotton throughout my room that your sleepy fingers would go to sleep on, and but kind of saying like people start attributing things to you that are not you, like you were kind of saying, Mike. And we were at a karate taekwondo competition, and a child from my class happened to be there, and the dad's walking by, and he goes, Miss Stacy. Then he goes, busy fingers. And I remember I was like, yeah, I'm like, that's not me. That's Dr. Gibbs. Like, I just quote her a lot. But what I absolutely love is that she, I'm going to say this kindly, she has stuck to what she believes in, opposed to some other programs created by OTs where they've sold out. And I will say that Dr. Gibbs is very much still, nope, we should not be writing at an early age. Nope, we should not be, we've got to develop this body. And then I also think as a parent, the journey I went through with my oldest son, who I also talk about in chapter 5, who he's 26, and he's given me full permission.
It's nice of you to ask. I'm not sure I've ever asked either of my kids if I can talk about them on the podcast.
Well,
That's power on.
Yeah. Yeah, when I wrote the manuscript, I brought Mason in, and like I put his name, and like we went through everything. And then before the final thing was done, I'm like, I need you to give me permission one more time before I do this. So, but I appreciate, because I think that kind of gives this connection. But when I was journeying with him as a parent, and he was struggling in school, and in my gut as a parent, I felt like there was something else going on than what I was being told, that, pigeonholed. Y'all see what I'm saying. But anyway, I think it was knowing what I had learned from Dr. Gibbs and what I had learned from occupational therapy that really kind of nudged me to take Mason to an OT. And then that was complete life changing. But I don't know, had I not heard her and like followed her, if I would have quite had that, the knowledge or just the kind of intuition of, okay, we should do that. But really and truly, like things that I talk about, and I get super, super excited. I mean, I think physical development is the thing I'm just most, and I think it's the thing that I feel like we overlook it, and the importance of, how we talk about getting children, ready for school, or we have children who are having issues in school. And it's like, we're not looking at this physical development piece.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you can break it down, and so again, I love doing that. But I think what spawned me on that journey was hearing Dr. Gibbs speak in
Mm-hmm.
2004.
That's awesome. I think um, physical development is one of the things I've been learning more about myself. Started with Mike and the Teaching with the Body and Mind podcast, and then that's why chapter 5 was so impactful for me, because it fit right where I needed it to be. Because I've been frustrated with, like, the Indiana Early Learning Standards. They have a section, personal health and growth or something like that. And there's like one little line item that lumps fine and gross motor together, and that's all it says about it. And there's so much more to it. And again, this frustration that, kids can't read or whatever, how much of it is because they're not getting this physical stuff in
Hmm.
preschool? That
Yeah.
seems like such an obvious connection. And then you pour out all this research, and you got it, some of it from Dr. Marianne Gibbs. It's black and white. Like, why is it still
Yeah.
even a question that we should be doing more play and more paying more
Yeah.
attention to the details of physical development?
Right. And then just, the vestibular system as well. And I think that's one of my things with, I do know that we have the COVID babies are in school. And I was doing a session yesterday, and I'm like, we did what we had to do during that time frame. We were in survival mode. We need to forgive ourselves for any practice that might not have been, very developmentally responsive. But we had a generation of children who did not play, who really sat stagnant. And there's no wonder they're fidgeting in their seats and they can't sit up. I mean, their internal senses have not developed. That vestibular system hasn't had the opportunity, and their muscles haven't had the opportunity to develop to sustain them sitting in a chair. So of course they're fidgeting. Of course they're, sliding out of the chair. This is a whole critical part of their component that has not been given the chance to develop and grow.
Yeah, and I feel like it's the because people don't take a developmental perspective, so that's why I love the term developmentalist, right? Like that idea that which I learned from you, Stacy, is that, oh, they don't, they have this hard time, so we'll just remind them more often. We'll just basically use power on these children to say,
Hmm.
no, you've got to sit down. You've
Yeah.
got to sit down. Hold that pencil. You're holding it the wrong way. Don't, it's like ignoring that motor development, like any other development, is developmental. And if they were
Hmm.
missing things early on, then you help them with those and give them more opportunity. If they didn't
Hmm.
have opportunities to be climbing, to be roughhousing, to be riding bikes, then give them more opportunities doing that rather than just telling them over and over to sit still, and
Hmm.
that blind spot is, I mean, it's adultism, right? It's the failure
Yeah.
of being able to take another perspective, which we
Yeah.
usually say is that it's this developmental thing that, 3 and 4 year olds can't do. And
Mm.
yet,
Yeah.
time and time again, I see lots of adults who prove
Grown-ups
that
can do it.
adults
Yeah.
can't take
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I think that's so important. And I was going to even point out in your book, near the beginning, you have this like chart of literacy and language
Oh,
and
uh-huh.
then kind of the things. And it's what I love about it is if you start at the bottom, because we have infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. So we're using your
Hmm.
book in that way of like, yep, one way you can explain to parents what they're doing is, yeah,
Hmm.
when they're getting all this sensory stuff, when they're getting all this, one of the things it does is it leads to
Hmm.
this,
Uh-huh.
I mean, without losing the sight of, the whole child and everything. But if a parent is worried about, especially when they move into toddlers, when it starts to get a little dicier, and like, nope, that's still, we're working on these things.
Hmm.
Yes, they are the precursor to that. And
Hmm.
I like that you separate it out so much. Like
Thank
Lisa
you.
Murphy has the nice pillars and the
Hmm.
foundation and all that, but it's a little more simplified because she's talking about not just literacy, but it's
Right.
really nice in this case of if these are the things missing for a specific child, like it's an easy way for me to point to a teacher and say, oh, so you need to, just go outside more often with this kid, get him climbing or get her climbing, like
Hmm.
it's a really simple way, the visuals, and it's great to put, like, I know that you got that from Dr. Gibbs, so it's kind of nice to see the way, and now I'm using your chart
Yeah, good.
which is credited to you. So, you know, but like just that, like, it's just really cool to
Tracing it back.
tracing it back. And because it does, that is the blind spot I see too. That's why I wrote my book on, you know, rough and tumble plays, same thing. And then when I
Mhm.
got a new job that also had an OT department, like more than one OT would like be walking by and they'd pull my book out of their bag, like, glad you're here, you know? And so it's kind of cool. I relied on a few OTs, but then since then, because of that book, then I meet more OTs and
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's such a blind spot in our field. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I've become such a
that's all I got to say.
fangirl of occupational therapists, and that's why I love that this is who you brought to the conversation, Stacy, because it's so important that we get outside of our ECE bubble, especially if we're only focusing on one ECE source. Cough, NACI, cough, cough. Um, because there's so much that they're bringing in that we have forgotten or are ignoring or have never had presented to us. We've got to we've got to be more interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, I
Mhm.
think.
Yeah. And it's um you know, when we look at literacy and that foundation, and it's not just the alphabet, which was the whole, you
Hmm.
know, part of my
Yeah.
book, but that but being, I think, being able to explain and connect and again kind of drawing from OTs and going, okay, this is why this is important, but this does support your, you know, children's future reading and writing, and it's just as critical as the other components of it.
Hmm. Yeah.
And as
Right.
Mike
Thank you.
said,
Oh,
well, I was going to say, to reiterate what Mike said, one thing Mike said is uh, her work and your work really highlight the importance of infant and toddler teachers in
yeah.
elementary aged writing. And it's sometimes it's really hard to help infant and toddler teachers and caregivers see their value in the long-term picture,
Hmm.
and understanding the shoulder to the fingers and the importance of gross motor movement in the first 3 years of life and how it relates to writing later on
Hmm.
and reading is so important for those teachers to hear as well, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah.
For
And one more
sure.
quick thing I wanted to say is, for those of you watching the podcast, if you want her, Dr. Gibbs, that's her name?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. If you
Dr.
want her,
Marianne Gibbs.
Marianne Gibbs, if you want her book, right out of the box, right is, if you're just listening to the podcast,
Yes.
right is spelled WRITE.
Yeah.
Yes. Very good point to make there. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
So, Richard, it's your turn now.
Well, I want to say in general, my entire life, personal and professional, has been influenced by matriarchs. I've been so blessed to have worked with some of the great matriarchs in the early childhood field and to just spend my entire life around women in general, powerful women. And so I just love the topic of matriarchs because my whole life has been transformed by them. Um, my current contemporary uh, matriarch is she's a powerhouse. She will not let anything stop her, and she has transformed this field. And her name is Heather Burnt Sanford.
No.
So I just want to mention that. I want to put that out there because she has transformed the landscape of early childhood.
Ah, you're swell.
But that said, the one I came on here promising, I would say, was Bev Bos. Bos. And
Hmm.
Bev absolutely transformed my life. The first time I saw her at a conference was in 1980 something, 90 something, I don't even know. I'm too old to count that far back. And just sitting in her session and soaking up that joy and that passion absolutely transformed my life because not only did it change how I taught in the classroom, it said to me, I want to be Bev when I grow up. I want to be up on a stage and inspiring people like she inspired me.
Hmm.
And I would not have been doing what I've been doing for the last 30 whatever years had it not been for what Bev did. And Bev and her son in law, Michael, and her friend Tom Hunter did um, for me all those many years ago and so many times since until Bev passed.
Hmm.
And Bev, she wrote books that are still out there for early childhood teachers. Uh, Don't Move the Muffin Tins, I think, is her most classic. Oh,
Mhm.
Heather's pulling it from her shelf. There we go. Classic Bev Bos book. Oh, that was her final one, Tumbling Over the Edge, a rant. And Together We're Better was another classic one of hers. Yes, all the best early childhood people I know have Bev's books in arm's reach.
Only because my shelves are alphabetical.
I will say two
Great.
of those are actually in my I sort of office in my atelier, like the art studio that I use with
Mm,
kids.
yes.
And two of those, there's two Bev Bos books, and actually right now there's the whole child alphabet are the ones that are just out on the counter for when teachers
Uh,
go in to get art materials. There's also the books for inspiration. So it's
well,
Thank
all
you.
coming together.
we got this burgeoning matriarch, Stacy Benge, sitting right here.
That's right.
When we do this podcast 30 years from now,
That's right. Stacy will be in there.
Yeah,
I'm going to be,
y'all are too
I won't have any
kind.
vision or ears left, but I'll be talking about Stacy Benge.
Y'all are too kind. Thank you.
So, but that
So,
was mine
Richard,
for
will
me.
you, in
Go ahead.
case no one has, I mean, I think we go in sometimes with the assumption that everybody knows who Bev is, but can
Right.
you talk a little bit about what her thing was? Like why is she so magical? Because honestly, I'm so jealous of people who have this long, deep history with her because I didn't, for whatever reason. You know, I think I have an article from the 90s that I love about joy in early childhood classrooms from Exchange. But other than that, it's been maybe the last 15 years that I've gotten into Bev. And so for the folks who don't know her, what should they know about her?
Well, what made Bev so inspirational and spot on about every word that came out of her mouth is that she lived what she believed. She created and ran the Roseville Community Preschool in Roseville, California, right outside Sacramento. And if anyone out there has ever had the chance to go to Bev's preschool, especially in the years that Bev was alive and running it, I went many times, and it was like I would often call it like a pilgrimage to Mecca, and it was like sacred ground, and I would just stand there and cry, and I would because it was about pure play and nothing else. There was no artifice, there was no curriculum with a capital C, there was very little. I don't want to say there was very little planned. She was incredibly intentional. There was a tremendous amount of planning and intentionality that went into her environments and how her days played out. But that's all the kids did all day long is play. I'll mention that she came to national prominence in the early 70s when she got a spot on 60 Minutes. And she
Such a
was
good
on,
interview.
right?
So good, yeah.
And she was on 60 Minutes because at the time, clothing was optional at her preschool, and that made her newsworthy. And that really changed the trajectory of her life was that 60 Minutes interview. And clothing came back on within years after that. But that sense of absolute freedom for the children and absolute trust of what the children know is um, uh, what they know what's best for them was the hallmark of her program. And it transferred into all of the books she wrote, the music she created, the 11 conditions for the development of healthy human growth that she gave us. And yeah, she was the other thing about her that made her so magical and made her so trustworthy is that she was the true early childhood nerd. She, anytime she gave a presentation, she had 10 different early childhood books that she was in the middle of, and they had all these bookmarks and post-it notes. And she would be, Michael, get me this one book. I need to quote from that one. And she was always obsessively keeping up with the latest research. And when the field of neurology really came to the forefront of early childhood education 25 years ago, she was right there on that cutting edge, reading the neurology texts and educating the rest of us about them.
Yeah. one of the things I love, and I had this one I hadn't heard until you and I started talking about her, Richard, the 11 elements of healthy human growth or conditions.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen that. And I love that because I think probably it was Tiffany Pearsall who started talking about healthy childcare instead of quality childcare. And so this is back in my mind again now. And I think I just want to encourage people to look that up. Like go look at the 11 conditions for healthy human growth because it is a shift. Not that I don't want quote unquote quality, but I think we've lost track of what quality really means, or it's sort of
What it looks
sometimes it's a thought terminating cliche to say, oh, but it has to be quality. And we're like, oh, well, then I guess I shouldn't say anymore. I don't want
Well,
to
we're
people
relying
to,
on those national organizations and quote unquote
yeah,
experts
yeah.
provide quality for us.
And the rating scales and stuff. And I think getting back to healthy human development. And I think that's come up in every conversation we've had about your three people, getting back to human development. Like and getting out of this, well, they're children and I think the power on for with comes into that too. And let's just think about what we need for healthy human beings, mentally,
Yeah.
physically, psychologically, spiritually, all that stuff.
Yes.
Um, and stop.
Not the early childhood education field, we're the early childhood development field.
We should be,
Yeah.
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 Yeah. What
And I
what
used
else? Yeah.
Bev's 11 conditions just yesterday at a conference in Michigan. And I'll use Eve Trook's role play this Tuesday in my intro to early childhood class.
Nice.
So today's podcast is really very relevant for me right this week.
Perfect. Nice. Anything else anybody wanted to say and didn't get to say?
I'm just going to share one quick story, which I think I may have shared on an episode before, but not when Richard was
How
here.
dare you
So
repeat stories?
I know,
It's
but
my job.
our office assistant, front desk person, Julie, is like back on the workforce, whatever, and she's like this great front desk person. But at one point, I don't know, after working for at least 6 months, she suddenly comes in with her Bev Bos books and just says, "Do you know who Bev Bos is?" And she's like, "Bev Bos is," and that's like, "Yeah," and or whatever. I said, she's like, "Yeah, my kids went to Roseville,"
Oh my
and
gosh.
Oh,
Mm.
and starts talking about things. And then just a few months ago, she had been at a workshop, and got inspired, and she just like they were redoing their garage at home, and she just comes in with this carload of planks and milk crates. And she's
Mm.
like, and she was just like, our playground, we're still in the midst of building our playground, or and outdoor area. And she's just like, I just like, was thinking about what Bev would have done, and like, this is what we needed.
Hmm.
And it was just, I don't know, it was so cool to see her light up.
Uh-huh.
And we already had some like logs that someone had brought in. Actually, the person's house that I'm recording in now. These like 2,000-pound logs. So those were already in place, but then suddenly the planks and the like it just suddenly transformed the way kids played. But it was so cool to see her, and it's like she can, it's like it's not just here's what I learned from
Hmm.
Bev. It's like, I mean, I think joy is the thing. It's like there's this thing inside of like, oh, can I recreate the joy?
Hmm.
And it doesn't even have to be the same materials. It doesn't have, but it's the thing of, that like what would Bev do kind of
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
just that idea of like, how do I get the spark or the joy?
Yeah.
And it was just so cool. And it's such a, I don't know, I feel lucky working at a place where it's like, you know,
Yeah.
like the staff, even like staff that aren't working directly with kids are like kind of also inspired
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
Bev specifically, but um, yeah, all the people we've been talking about in some way. So
Yeah.
Sure.
that's the
Cool.
story I have.
Well, that's great. Thanks.
I probably one of my regrets. She was in Texas a few years before she died and was presenting at a conference. And one of my friends was on the committee, and he's like, "Hey, just come up. You can come meet her." And I think it was like a day both my kids had something going on, and I'm like, I can't make it happen.
Hmm.
And then it was just like a few years later she died, and I was like, ah, I should have
Yeah.
just gone.
Yeah.
Should
I
have
never
made that
met her
happen.
either.
Well,
That is my regret too.
yeah.
Although I do remember when Marianne Belglovsky walked in with Michael and they sat in the front row. And it was still when I was just like, you know, going beyond Minnesota, and
Hmm.
it's suddenly like, oh, okay, no, no pressure here, right?
Yeah.
Which is fine because I mean our ideas do align and everything, but it's
Mhm.
had it been Heather, I would have been worried about shitting my pants. But it was the same conference that like the next day I knocked over Dan Hodgins. So
I was just gonna say,
it was
did you
my
knock him over like you did Dan?
I did not,
Um,
although I almost hit him with a book. There was
Jesus,
because it was
Michael.
about not making sure kids don't sit still, and I do this whatever little thing where I end up throwing a book and it at least went over like hit the table where they were. So, but no injuries were reported.
Yeah. All right. This seems like a good place to wrap it up
Heather, would you mind
before Mike gets
if I
further
added
into
one
tales of
self-serving note?
violence. Go
I'm
ahead, Richard.
I just wanted to tell your audience, thank you for giving me just one quick second.
Yeah.
My Zen and the Art of Early Childhood
Oh,
page was
yeah.
scammed away from me about a month ago, and I had 132,000 followers. It took me 12 years to gain that many, and I've lost it now. So if you're out there listening and you follow my Zen and the Art of Early Childhood page, you may have noticed that I haven't posted in a month, and that page now is sadly dead. So
Mhm.
I want to invite you to follow. It's a long thing to type in your Facebook or, well, I haven't gotten it onto Instagram or on your Facebook page, which is the new Richard Cohen's Zen and the Art of Early Childhood. Please find me over there and follow me over there if you can,
Yeah.
Heather.
Yeah, no problem. You want to plug your book, Mike, while we're plugging
Oh
things?
yeah, sure. So as you watch this episode, my new book, The Power and Pretend, will be out,
Yeah.
in which I talk about the way children in, learn different roles of power and gain their own sense of power and agency
Mhm.
in pretend play, heavily influenced by someone named Eve Trook.
All right, perfect. All right. So this was great fun. Always fun to talk to y'all. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you again next week on another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.
Bye.
Bye.